Welcome to Inside the Walls with William Pasquale, brought to you by Perner Frederick Commercial Real Estate. Welcome to a new level of commercial real estate built upon relationships and proven results. Good afternoon and welcome to Inside the Walls with William Pasquale. Today's topic will be on employee stock ownership plans, otherwise known as ESOPs, and we have the absolute expert on to talk about them. We'll be speaking with Richard Harmon, Managing Director at CSG Partners. For the past decade, Richard has served as Managing Director at CSG Partners, one of the nation's leading ESOP investment banks. And he has completed over $1 billion in transactions for clients in a diverse set of industries. His transactions have received many awards, including 4 times Deal of the Year and the 2020 ESOP Deal of the Year worth over $100 million. And here's a quick overview on what ESOP can do for you.
If you've built a successful company, you know what it's like to be all in. Now, there's nothing wrong with being focused on your business and not wanting to let go. But what if you could gain financial diversification without sacrificing your legacy? It's possible with an employee stock ownership plan. An ESOP enables privately held companies to sell shares to an employee trust. The transaction is negotiated between the company and a trustee who agree upon a fair market valuation. The trust doesn't directly pay for the shares. Instead, the company funds the transaction with pre-tax dollars and financing from third-party lenders and/or seller notes. Shares are allocated annually to full-time employees and vest within 3 to 6 years. When employees leave, vested shares are sold back to the company at a current valuation. So who benefits from an ESOP? Owners gain liquidity, can defer capital gains taxes on the sale, and may maintain upside and a meaningful role in the business. Their companies receive tax deductions and can even become income tax-free entities. And employees earn a real stake in their company while securing a unique retirement benefit. So if you're still all in on your company, but you'd like to unlock some of your net worth, realize tax advantages, and continue to build your legacy, think ESOP. And talk to us at CSG Partners. We've guided hundreds of clients across all industries through the ESOP process. Want to learn more? Visit us at csgpartners.com.
And welcome, Richard Harmon. How are you this afternoon, sir?
I'm great, William. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I know you well, but if you could just introduce yourself and just give us a bit of your background for the audience.
Sure. I hate to admit how many decades that I've been a certified public accounting, certified public accountant. Started practicing in the late 70s, became a CPA with PricewaterhouseCoopers, spent 5 years in public accounting, became a financial systems expert, ended up building a national technology staffing firm, serving Fortune 500 companies all over the US, deploying programmers, sold that to a company, went public, and started a bunch of other companies. And I ended up as the CFO for an ESOP-owned manufacturing company in upstate New York. And that led to my position a decade ago at CSG Partners. So that's my short story.
Okay. So since today's topic is ESOP, why don't you explain to everybody what is an ESOP?
I'll keep the history lesson short, but it really started in the 50s. There was this gentleman, Louis Kelso. He's known as the father of the ESOP. And he wrote a book called The Capitalist Manifesto. He actually wrote it in response to the Communist Manifesto. He says, America's a capitalist society. How do we create more capitalists? A small percentage of the company owns most of the wealth. It's actually been that way since the history of the world, after there were kings and queens and the like. And so he said, how do we come up with a plan to inspire owners to share equity with employees? And he lobbied for a couple of decades, and he was able to get ESOPs included as part of the ERISA legislation in '74, which created IRAs and 401ks. So that's the origin of it. And he had to achieve a couple things. He had to allow the owners to continue to govern, create a benefit for the employees, make it more interesting for the owner to take money off the table through that door than versus a third-party sale.
Well, what are some of the best company types that can really benefit from using this type of program?
I always like to say, as some of our friends like to say, don't sell the seed, sell the crop, don't sell the sapling, sell the tree, or sell the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So when a company is very small, an ESOP a lot of times doesn't make sense. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. The view isn't worth the climb. And the reason is that if you don't have a profitable company, you really haven't created any value yet. So where we find it to make the most sense is once somebody's actually has several $1 million in profits, $2 to $3 million in profits and above, 10 million or more in sales. Now we've got a company that we can take to the banks and we can raise capital so the owner gets money at closing. We've got a valuable company. A company can be worth anywhere from 4 times to 10, 11 times profits. And that value will allocate to the employees over time. And when you're doing an ESOP prior to that, you're not leaving enough benefit for the employees, not so inspiring. They get their statement, there's not much there, and the owner didn't get much off the table. And then, once you do an ESOP, you have to maintain it, and there's some administration requirements. You have an independent trustee, you have a third-party administration firm, and you have an annual valuation. So that's where we like to, that 3 million and above in profits is what I like to see.
Okay. And who sets the price for the company, and how are these types of deals even funded?
That's a great question. So an ESOP is essentially a tax-enhanced leverage buyout of your own business.
Okay.
Congress said to the trustee, who's the buyer on behalf of the employees of the shares, do not pay more than fair market value. So they're allowed to pay fair market value. They're not allowed to pay more, because if they pay more than fair market value, they're taking advantage of the employees. So all the same techniques that anyone uses when they're acquiring a company, the trustee with their own independent valuation firm use when they're valuing the company to become an ESOP. So what do they use? Primarily discounted cash flow. Most businesses in the US, when you're selling a landscaping business or a restaurant and the like, you're selling at a multiple of future cash flows, discounted back. It's called discounted cash flow. And then you also look at public and private comparable transactions. And then there's another flavor as well. You'll look at the balance sheet, you'll look at the assets, and that would be another form of valuation. But basically taking a combination of all the valuation metrics that everybody uses when they're acquiring a company, that's what's involved in pricing the company. And the upshot is you end up being able to get fair market value for it. And then Congress has put in place this kind of a bucket of tax benefits so that the owner who's selling to an ESOP will often end up with more after-tax cash flow than if they sell to a third party.
And I wasn't aware that these things were actually, you're really creating a trust within the business, or is it like as in the retirement entity of it, or?
It's actually a defined benefit plan. It's a retirement trust. So the shares are sold to an ESOP trust, and there's a trustee who watches over the trust on behalf of the employees. And the employees are allocated shares over a period of time based on their salaries.
Now, is there a board that oversees the trustees as well?
Well, what happens?
Can that happen?
Yeah, it's the same board that governs every company in America is governed by the board. If you have a company, you're the only person. Well, you're effectively the board. So during the transaction, the ESOP is an independent trustee, but after the transaction, they almost never have a seat on the board. So the board continues to govern, and the board can recommend to the ESOP trustee a slate of directors to vote for each year. One of the issues is for owners is, it's something we'll probably talk about in a little bit, is when you sell shares to an ESOP, are you going to continue to govern? And if you can't continue to govern, well, you're kind of less likely to want to be governing alongside your employees. I do have it happen. It's, 5-10% of the cases. Most of the time, it's just the board that continues to govern, just like before.
Okay. Now, how does this really impact a company's culture when a company decides to do an ESOP program or an ESOP plan, with the wealth distribution, and how like ESOPs get owners and employees aligned by sharing equity?
So let's pretend you sell 10 million of shares to the ESOP, and the owner's going to get paid off $10 million over a period of time. They're going to have an opportunity to defer all their capital gains, whereas if they just sell to a third party in a high tax state, a third of it would disappear. The employees will be allocated that 10 million equity over time. Each year, the employees will get a statement. Here's how many shares you're allocated. Here's how many shares you're vested in. Here's the value per share. And after you get through the first few years, usually about year 3, 4, and 5, the employees end up seeing, especially if the company's been able to maintain and grow, a significant amount of value in their ESOP accounts. So what happens with ESOPs across the board is they end up growing 3-4% faster than their peers. The employees end up with 3 to 4 times what they would normally have in their 401ks by the time they retire. A lot of times I'll have owners do corporate communication plans where they'll explain to the employee, hey, if you can create a few thousand more in revenue or a few thousand more in profits, this is what it does to your share value. So it really gets everybody aligned. Also, in the Great Recession, the like, there was dramatically less layoffs with ESOP companies versus everyone else. So it works out really well.
And I'm about to say, I can just imagine because we've talked about this before, the impact on the employees themselves. I mean, I think you were involved in one that was in Jacksonville that just like the employees were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, we're actually going to be owners of this company.
That's so true. And different owners do different rollouts, but that one was especially emotional. So many of the employees, as they were interviewing them, are saying, oh, I can't believe what this has done for my family or will do for my family. I had another one in Florida where the owner initially did the ESOP, and a few years later, 2 or 3 years later, he called up, he said, Richard, now let's sell the whole company. And normally the employee has to wait, 12, 15 years before they're able to start selling their shares back. And in this case, when the company sold, he brought each of the employees in and he told them one after the other what it meant for them. And it made, they ended up with 5 times their annual salary into their 401k plans, which they could keep deferring forever. So what was interesting about this transaction is he was able to sell a significant stake, originally about 80% of the company, defer all his capital gains on the sale and reinvest the entire proceeds from the first sale. But then he still had a big chunk of synthetic equity in the form of warrants. So he still effectively owned a good stake in his enterprise. So when he sold to the third party the second time, the employees ended up with vesting in a bunch of shares and getting liquid on those shares. He ended up with another check, which the first check he didn't have to pay capital gains on. The second check he had to pay capital gains on. But when you add all those components up, if he just waited and done nothing and sold to that third party, he would have ended up with less after tax. Instead, he ended up with more after-tax cash flow in his hands, and his employees ended up with 5 times their annual salary into their 401k plans. And he had, he said 80% of his employees, and again, he brought them in one at a time, were in tears.
Wow.
What it meant for their family. So it really is powerful. When I was CFO of the manufacturing company in upstate New York, that was a very mature ESOP, and it was incredibly valuable to all the retirees. The company had 400 employees. It started in the 40s. ESOP happened in the 90s. And by, let's say, 2005, 6, 7, it was the most meaningful retirement fund that they had. It just really works well.
Now,
usually.
what are the top 3 benefits from a standpoint of an owner of the company looking for an exit strategy? Like, would a straight sale make more sense? It doesn't sound like, well, I guess it depends on the situation if it makes sense or not.
You know what I like to do? I always like to sit on the same side of the table as the owner. I'm like, well, what would I do? Once in a while, you have a strategic buyer. When Alphabet, Google's now Alphabet bought YouTube, it didn't have any revenues. It had massive losses, yet they paid an incredible amount of money for it. That's called a strategic sale. So usually a strategic buyer is going to pay more than anyone else. But 98% of all companies are sold to financial buyers. Most private equity purchasers are financial buyers. So they're paying a normal multiple, that kind of 4 to 11 times EBITDA. And the ESOP pays the same price as a financial buyer. So in that case, when you have so many owners that have so much of their net worth tied up in their business, they get liquidity, they get diversification, they get to stay in charge, and they get to maintain an upside piece of their business. So that's one powerful thing that it does for the owners. Also, it maintains legacy. A lot of times when you sell, your culture is absorbed into another company. A lot of your staff is laid off. There's a lot of drama and trauma, and that doesn't happen when you do an ESOP. It aligns your workforce because now you're sharing the growth in the business with your whole team. And again, you get to maintain that long-term legacy. I don't know if I did 3 or more there, but
well, now here's what are the top 3 benefits from the standpoint of the employees of the company that they'll benefit when an ESOP's being done at their company?
Well, what I see mostly is it aligns the employees with management. They're all paddling the same direction. Again, it's less likely they're going to be laid off. ESOPs are an opportunity, not a promise. The company needs to be valuable when it's time for that employee to be able to sell their shares. And the good news is that Congress put in place this pool of tax benefits so that some ESOP companies become tax-free in perpetuity. The company gets to pay down the owners with pre-tax dollars. The owners get to defer their capital gains. They have to structure a little bit differently for that part of it. And then as the company's creating all this pre-tax cash flow, they have plenty of working capital to grow the company. So the company becomes stronger in a post-ESOP transaction. And then, of course, if the company does sell, like that example I mentioned earlier,
right,
they get liquid sooner. They'll get the money into their 401k. Whereas usually, I've got one right now where the owner sold, had 800 employees. And he said, I was so excited about the sale and none of my employees were. And of course, he, bonused his team and he bonused his folks. But this time he's already built another company. He sold the last company about 6 years ago. And he said, this time I want an ESOP because I want the employees to have that upside appreciation. And when we cross the goal line, I want us all to be able to achieve a benefit.
It just sounds like an amazing program. And, obviously with a group like CSG, you can't go wrong. So just the last thing I do with everybody on the show is this thing called wisdom on the wall, words you live by, a quote, a way of being, something that just moves you every day. Richard Harmon, what is yours?
Well, I would say for my passion, which is, putting in place all these ESOPs and creating all this abundance for everybody, it would be creating legacies, magnifying wealth, and enriching lives. That's my purpose. So that's what I do.
Richard Harmon, CSG Partners. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, William. Delighted to be here.
And until next week, we will see you all later. Bye-bye.